Welcome to another episode of Cape Ann Today. We also have a podcast. People should know that. I'm here today to talk. I messed it up again. All right, I'm just going to go right into it. The podcast thing to have to go. All right. Welcome to another episode of Cape Ann Today. The next performance of Gloucester Stage will explore the midlife love affair that overwhelmed Gilded Age novelist Edith Wharton. Speaking with me today is the playwright Anne Undeland, author of Mr. Fullerton Between the Sheets, and Professor McNamara Dawley. She is an Edith Wharton scholar and adjunct professor at Lesley University. The play runs from July 1st through the 24th, but both of my guests will be speaking about Edith Wharton in the play at a special Sawyer Free Library event this Thursday at 6 o'clock. So welcome, ladies. It's great to have you here.
Oh, it's good to be here.
So, Anne, let's start with you right away. How did you discover this Edith Wharton story, and what about it made you feel there was a play there?
Oh, well, I live in the Berkshires, and Edith Wharton's house, the Mount, is in the Berkshires. So she's in the air. And Edith Wharton wrote Ethan Frome and her companion novella, Summer, which she called her Hot Ethan, which I think is great, about life in the hill towns in the Berkshires. So she's very much in the air. And I would say about 10 years ago, I came across an article about a love affair that the 46-year-old Edith Wharton had with Morton Fullerton. And I remember thinking, oh, well, that's rather interesting. And I sort of filed it away. And then a little after that, I came across what's known as the Palmato fragment, which is some erotica that Edith Wharton wrote. And I read that and I was completely bowled over, of course, by the writing, which is great because it's Edith Wharton, but also by the heat in that writing. And then during the pandemic, I came across the letters that Edith Wharton wrote her lover, Morton Fullerton, and I was bowled over by them. I was so touched by them. She's so full of yearning and vulnerability and anxiety. She's clearly head over heels in love. And I remember thinking, as I was reading these letters, thinking, oh my God, that could be me. And, obviously it's not me. I can't write like Edith Wharton, but for the feeling in them, because that feeling of falling in love, and note, we fall in love. We don't land in love. We fall. It's this crazy, swirling, hyper-aware, excruciating, glorious feeling that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, and I hope happens to everyone. So when I came across these letters that were so alive and so resonant for me and felt really so universal, I thought, oh, I think there's a play in this. So I picked up my pen and started writing. Oh, and the other thing about it is one of my big MOs as a playwright is to write fully embodied stories for women over 45, women over 50, women over 55, because I would say our patriarchal culture just wants us to disappear. And I don't want to disappear. And I think our stories are there. And so to write about a 46-year-old woman's sexual awakening in a way that doesn't feel patronizing, doesn't laugh at her, it's not a gross out thing that often happens when an older woman is presented on stage or screen as a person, as a sexual being. So I wanted to explore that. And then along the way, I found my playwright's heart just expanding to explore all these different kinds of love in Edith's life. So there's the love she has for her dear old friend, Henry James. There's the love she has for her dogs. There's a fictional character in the play, her Irish maid, and there's a very close relationship there. There's the love she has for Paris. And above all, there's the love of Edith Wharton's work and her transcendent writing. So that's not much of a nutshell, but that's what that's what got me there, and that's what I hope to do with this play.
So Megan, you are a scholar of the Gilded Age. and Edith Wharton. So how does everything Anne say square with scholarship? Like what?
Absolutely beautifully. She calls it a work of historical fiction, but other than Posey's invention, which I think is a really great device that helps like the play move forward really beautifully, it's pretty darn historically accurate.
So
well, sometimes fact is stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
And I will say, in the writing of the piece, if I was on I'm a little bit like a bloodhound, so if I'm on the right trail artistically, I found that the history would start giving gifts. For example, it figures in the play, and everybody watching the show will have to come and see the play to find out how this happens. But Edith Wharton first wrote Ethan Frome, which is this quintessentially American work. She wrote it in French initially. And so I have that as a plot point in the play. And so, yeah, the history started giving all sorts of wonderful gifts as I wrote this play.
So go on, Megan. Go.
She started it as an exercise to practice her like written French, basically.
Yes.
And wrote like this quintessential New England novel. Despite being a New Yorker at heart, given that even though her like home that she built and loved the most was in the Berkshires, and she spent the later part of her life in Paris, she's so closely associated with that old New York moneyed, sort of semi-aristocratic milieu, that the fact that this is one of her masterpieces there is no accident, and the pun is intended in talking about Ethan Frome, that this work came from this particular time period in her life when she was heartbroken and stuck in a loveless marriage, and dealing with the ins and outs of passion.
So this is before the affair. She wrote Ethan Frome.
It's unclear. I don't know. Actually, Megan, you would know, but for the purposes of the play, I have her writing it at the end of the play, sort of as the affair is over or ending.
So that was one of my questions. Well, first of all, I want to ask Megan, were you aware of these letters? I assume you were.
Yeah, so they were first, there's a really interesting story behind their discovery that's been kind of retold multiple times, which is one of the most interesting things that, as we historically research, we have to revise our concept of the story. So she, in her autobiography, which is a very carefully tailored version of herself, which is called A Backward Glance, she doesn't mention the affair at all. She doesn't mention her divorce, the unhappiness in her marriage, her troublesome relationship with her mother. All of these things show up in her fiction in various ways, but she doesn't talk about them in her autobiography. Her first major biographer, R.W.B. Lewis, was the first one to declare that these letters, which were discovered when the Beinecke Library at Yale got her personal papers, were not, people had thought that she had been having an affair with her good friend Walter Berry. A lot of people assumed that they were lovers, but there's no evidence to support that, actually, just that they were really close intellectual companions, much like Edith Wharton and Henry James. And they're buried near each other, she and Walter Berry, like that's how strongly they felt about each other. But this sort of dashing, passionate, heated sexual awakening was something that was slowly revealed over the course of about 7 years of research. And the research assistant who dug up a lot of the information in Paris has disputed a lot of the version of events that R.W.B. Lewis presented in 1975 in a more recent book. But long story short, she absolutely had a steamy affair with Morton Fullerton, and she was absolutely lovelorn in her desire for more attention from him. And I think that's one of the reasons it's so fascinating, because like Anne said, it's not only the story of a woman's sort of sexual awakening in her mid-40s, but also this, strong, brilliant, powerful woman made weak in the knees by a man that's not really good enough for her.
Right, undone.
Yeah. Is this a surprise? Does it come as a surprise to most people that she could be so vulnerable? Particularly,
it came as a surprise to me. Honestly, even though I think Edith Wharton writes about love better than almost anybody, you know, in The Age of Innocence and Ethan Frome and whatnot. I always had this sort of image in my mind of her being this kind of forbidding character, this kind of terrifying person that you'd sort of want to sit next to at a dinner party because you know she'd be smarter than anybody, but also you wouldn't necessarily want to sit next to because if she found you stupid, she'd just level you. And so I always saw her as this kind of forbidding character. And so for her to fall in love like that, to be undone in that way is like, it's like an oak tree falling. And I thought that also was excellent fodder for drama.
It's interesting also because, I'm so sorry.
No, keep going.
It's interesting also because her, her meeting Fullerton coincides with her literary success. So she's really coming into her own in the way many women can recognize in their mid-40s, where they're feeling their professional success, where they're feeling their personal growth and development and really kind of owning their womanhood in a lot of ways. And as she did that, her literary circle expanded. And as her literary circle expanded, it led her to meeting Morton Fullerton. But prior to that, and Fullerton's not the cause of her divorce, he's an element of it, but there are many, many causes to her getting a divorce.
Not the least of which was her husband himself, but
her husband's mother, Teddy's mother, was actually really fearful of her literary circle of friends and thought that it had a deleterious effect on her marriage. Because for a woman to have that kind of imposing intellectual stature, like I laughed when Anne said that, like I would love to sit next to her, and I also would never want to say anything in front of her. Because she
end up in a novel.
and brilliantly skewered and put much better than you possibly could.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So you know, just let me just keep going a little bit. There's a wonderful quote of Edith Wharton, and it was so good I had to put it in the play. She says, when the affair is over, I should write better for this experience of loving. And I think that the affair woke her up in all kinds of ways. I mean, obviously it woke her up sexually, but I think it just woke her up in all these ways that she never expected. I think she turned into a person, and in the play you see this, she turns into a person that even she doesn't recognize. And it's like it's kind of a rebirth. And then out of that, I would argue, I mean, I don't know what the scholars say, Megan, but I would argue that her masterpieces, her real masterpieces, which to me are Ethan Frome, The Age of Innocence, some of her short stories, come after the affair. And I think it's because she was an expanded, born person. So
yeah, that was one of my questions actually, is how can we see this actually reflected in her literature? So.
Yeah, it's really evident, I think, as Anne would say, that her work and her ideas change over time. She published for about 40 years, which is pretty remarkable, not just for the Gilded Age and not just for a woman, but for an author, period. She wrote roughly a book a year, if you break down her scholarly output, and starting all after the age of 40. She wrote things starting as a child and a teenager, but her real success came all after the age of 40. And whereas her earlier work is often classified by literary scholars as naturalism, which means characters who are kind of tossed about by forces beyond their control, and like fate, for example, her later work kind of moves into examining the choices made by people, and the fact that those choices are what are either going to leave them trapped by convention forever or give them some sort of liberation and freedom. And I think that ties directly to the sort of sexual liberation and freedom she felt from her affair with Fullerton, and also the independence she gained from her divorce. So
yeah, I never thought of it that way, Megan. That's really good. Because, you know, another thing about Edith Wharton is, as the play begins, you know, The House of Mirth has just sold 150,000 copies, which in the world of publishing today or any period, that is just, that's crazy, enormous, insane number. So she's really, really successful. And oh my goodness, I lost my train of thought. Can we cut that part of this interview?
Well, no, I don't want to cut that because I think I was going to ask about that. I think it's, I wanted to know if how much money she was earning as an author and how much she had inherited wealth, right? A certain amount of it, did she?
Oh yeah, she had both.
Yeah. So
she had both, but there were questions about the will. When her mother died, there were all sorts of, she was in the middle of a dispute about her will. Oh, that's what I wanted to say, is that Edith Wharton always considered her, she didn't think she was beautiful, and she was not, conventionally beautiful in any way. But I remember watching an interview with Louis Auchincloss, who's a sort of critic of his own class. And he said that he thought she would have given it all up to have been beautiful.
oh
And
my
it's
gosh.
so it's heartbreaking, isn't it?
Oh,
I think for her to have this discovery in her affair that she is a desirable person, I think must have felt like just a complete revelation to her. And it had to have had an effect on the rest of her life.
Yeah, no question. The focus on appearance is definitely a consistent theme throughout her autobiographical writing, throughout a lot of the biographical writing. It was something that her family focused a great deal on, and as a result, she internalized a lot of that.
Because she was never the daughter her mother wanted. Her mother wanted beautiful, charming, girlish person, and Edith Wharton was anything but that. And I think that she really struggled with that. And there's that heartbreaking story. You can probably tell it better than I, Megan, but, on her wedding night, Edith goes in to ask her mother, what to expect. And you just imagine this very vulnerable person going in to ask her mother. And her mother basically tells her that I forget the quote, but it's something like her mother basically tells her to just go away. And how dare she even think of something so unimportant.
Yeah. Well, so vulgar would probably have been Lucretia.
Yeah.
right. So we don't talk about it, just do it, but we don't talk about it for sure. Yeah.
Or maybe not even do it. Just don't even think about it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I think Thursday night at the Sawyer Free Library will be so interesting with you two women, because we could go on forever. I could listen to you forever.
Oh.
So I hope people come. It's Thursday night at 6:00. And again, the performance runs from July 1st through the 24th, right? At Gloucester Stage.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does. And please come see it. The cast is wonderful. The direction's wonderful. The design.
And you are an
and really,
understudy.
who doesn't love a love story, right?
Yeah. Well, you are an understudy, Anne, right?
I am. I'm the understudy for the two female roles, because we're in the era we're in with the pandemic. Those things need to be sort of looked at. And I come to playwriting from acting. I've been an actor for years and years and years. And honestly, once I got to be over 50 and saw how few really great, fully embodied roles there are for women, I realized I had to start writing. And so that's what's happened. And I'm getting some traction. I could not be more thrilled than having this production at Gloucester.
My last question, but I think you've answered it, was what did you learn? What have each of you learned about Edith Wharton as a human being that makes us want to know her better? But I think you've already told us so much. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, I hope that this play helps people or gets people to have some respect for the powerful force in our lives that sex is, and that a woman over 50 being a sexual being is something that is interesting and something to sort of pique our interest, and it's not prurient. But my other fervent hope is that after the play, people will look at the people in their lives with more love, and that they will run, not walk, to get a copy of Ethan Frome, The Age of Innocence, Summer, The House of Mirth, anything by Edith Wharton, and start writing, because the writing is transcendent. She's really good.
Megan? Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, I love to emphasize the fact that her family is the Joneses of Keeping Up with the Joneses. That's who the family she was born into. That always helps to pique interest to some extent, because we all know that phrase. She's the first American author who was a woman to win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction for The Age of Innocence. And she's someone who is to be admired, not just for her courage in her personal life and for her professional work, but also for her humanitarian work during the First World War that not many people know about. She moved to France and essentially volunteered in like a nursing-esque capacity on the front lines of the war. And she was given, she's buried alongside war heroes at a cemetery in Versailles.
I did not know that. Her and Gertrude
Yes.
Stein, right?
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe that's the subject of the next play, right?
Exactly.
Fascinating. Well, thank you so much for talking with me, and I hope to see you on Thursday night. I hope that there's a big crowd there because it's such an interesting subject, and certainly the play sounds wonderful. And so, thank you for writing it.
Oh, well, thank you. We'll be reading a scene from the play at the event as well, so it'll give people a taste.
Great, great. Well, thank you and good luck.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Interested in a sponsorship? Email sponsor@1623studios.org to learn more.